I still remember getting my first ribbon at a track meet when I was 10. It was orange satin, and I got it for coming in last place. So I'll never forget the humiliation of being recognized for my failure in front of the whole school. But we all have our own stories. Maybe you were first place, but not fast enough to impress Dad. Or maybe you were just too tall, or too short, or too skinny or fat, or too rich or too poor, too light, too dark, bad at math, or maybe you were a slow reader, or maybe you just never felt enough. And you'd think we'd be over all this by now, surely. But these are the feelings that get stuck. And sometimes it's what's running the show years later when we lose our shit and we don't even know why. When did life get so complicated? Mine started out simple enough. I was the 11th of 12 kids. We had a 7-bedroom house, twice the bathrooms any family needs. Dad had more cars than Jay Leno. It's almost impossible to describe what it was like growing up with quite literally everything a kid can imagine. You see, we were filthy rich in imagination, and in reality, had absolutely no money. In fact, to house us all, our tiny Cape-style house had a living room and kitchen and bedrooms in the basement. And everything upstairs was bedrooms. And our only bathroom was actually an outhouse. And it was a 2-seater, which is technically twice the bathrooms any family really needs. And with a little imagination, we had plenty to play with in my father's junkyard. That's why he had so many cars. None of them ran. I do remember from those days, one night, laying in bed, feeling so scared. Listening to my parents fight downstairs, which happened a lot when he drank. I thought my father had killed my mother. And that, too, was imagination. What was real is it was cancer that took my mother when I was 7. And it was one of my older brothers who told me, "You have to be a grown-up now, and don't cry." I was 7, all I wanted to do was cry. Well, with my father's inability to care for us, 4 of us younger kids were adopted by an emotionally abusive aunt and uncle, who we accepted as best we could as our new parents. So in the grand scheme of things, getting this orange ribbon for coming in last place doesn't seem like a big deal as an adult. And I had forgotten about all that for decades until one day a few years ago, when I was exploring why I had lost it again over nothing important. And that's the memory that came up. It seemed like I was always the worst at everything that mattered to everybody else. There was one time I was winning was in music competitions. The one thing I was good at, and I was assured and reassured, you'll never make a living in music. Dreams don't pay the bills. Get a scholarship. Learn something useful. So I did that. I aced the SAT. I won a prestigious military scholarship. And being gay, I wasn't good enough for them. And there was growing up in a church that I really loved. And they made it pretty clear I definitely wasn't good enough for them. So what's enough? Did you know that Oprah Winfrey said that in her 35,000 interviews over 25 years, every single guest, from Barack Obama to Beyonce, asked afterward, how was that? Was that okay? So we all question ourselves. And a lot of shit happens that makes us question ourselves, and everywhere we look, there's someone validating that feeling. And a lot of people make money off of that. Did you know that Americans spend $100 billion a year on watches and jewelry? To tell time? I'm not buying that. Okay, I bought this one. Busted. I like to think I'm beyond all this, but my Movado here says otherwise. We create a lot of habits to get what we need to survive, to feel safe, to feel loved. From perfectionism to people-pleasing. And then we chase after or avoid our feelings with alcohol, drugs, sex, exercise, bodybuilding. I want a bigger butt, a smaller butt. I want somebody else's butt. We buy education, certifications, cars, houses. We buy fancy clothes. I'm wearing Robert Graham, by the way. What do you think? Do you like it? Okay, so that's the right answer. I used to wear beige and blue to safely beg to just blend in. So I don't wear bright colors to say, hey, look at me. I dress for myself, and if the cool kids in the lunchroom don't like it, I'm okay with that. Speaking of lunchrooms, we have our dieting. And we have our dieting again, and our dieting again. I lost the same weight a dozen times before I learned to just love myself. Today, half of teenage girls and a third of boys are trying to lose weight, while the CDC says that more students are reporting persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. And boy, do I get that. I remember as a teenager myself feeling like I just wanted to be invisible. I wanted to disappear whenever the TV would cover something like a gay pride parade. Because my parents would shout at the TV, why do they call that pride? They should call it shame. I didn't even know what it had to do with me yet, but I knew it wasn't good. And still, people who don't feel like they're enough, like my parents didn't, are passing all that on to a new generation of kids, some of whom will become bullies in the playground. Some of them will grow up to be bullies on the adult playgrounds of universities, corporations, and entire countries. So much suffering from something most people just want to dismiss. And I call that something enoughness. There never seems to be enough of proving our enoughness. With everyone I've ever worked with, doesn't matter if it's a private client or a student or a participant at a retreat, the common human struggle is that old stuck emotions are directing our current decisions, behaviors, and beliefs. That's so important, I repeat it every time I say it. The common human struggle is that old stuck emotions are directing our current decisions, behaviors, and beliefs. For example, when I went up to get that orange ribbon when I was 10, it's not like my life was in danger or anything. But something did happen, and I anchored the feeling of being known for doing poorly. And those feelings were running the show for decades without me even knowing it. Speaking of decades, I just celebrated my 60th birthday, not decade, to be clear. I celebrated at a retreat in Costa Rica with Bessel van der Kolk. Now, I tell you that just to try to impress you. And because Bessel is the author of The Body Keeps the Score, and arguably the world's foremost expert on trauma and the brain. And so I got to ask him about the cumulative effects of life's smaller traumas on our sense of enoughness. And he said small t trauma doesn't exist because it's not small. Feeling like no one cares is not a small thing. So it doesn't have to be worse to be bad enough. And trauma is not about the event, it's about the effect it has on us now. So losing my mother at 7 was a traumatic event. The feeling I got from being told not to cry and to be a grown-up now was the trauma because that stuck and was influencing my life 40-some years later. And Bessel was right, that's not a small thing. And of course, I didn't even know that was influencing my life until about 10 years ago. I enrolled in a year-long training program with Jack Canfield. You might remember him from the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. I joke that Jack Canfield ruined my life because until he woke me up, I didn't know I was suffering. I mean, we had and did everything we needed to be happy. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Life was good, it just lacked passion and joy. There was nothing to fix, there was nothing to worry about. I certainly didn't think I had a trauma history. And besides, I was always told, just deal with it. You can't change your past. And it turns out that's the big lie. We can. Jack introduced me to a technique created by Dr. Deborah Sandella called RIM, which stands for Regenerating Images in Memory. And working with RIM, I was able to go back and dissolve a lot of those old stuck feelings that had been running the show. And I created a new feeling, a new knowing, a knowing in my heart that it's okay if I come in last place. It's okay to cry. Might still do it during this talk. And it's okay to be playful. It's okay to be me. I don't know about you, but I sometimes get overwhelmed with all of the healing modalities available. So I will just share from my own experience some of the things I've been working with in my own journey. I've spent the last 10 years working with a lot of RIM and a lot of other things, like sitting in a 10-day silent meditation. Yeah, sitting in 10 days of silence, it's absolutely every bit as horrible as it sounds, if you're wondering. I call it Buddha jail. And I loved it, and I recommend it to everybody. And I tried holotropic breath work. And I traveled to Central America to work with ancient plant medicines and a variety of other strange things. So many ways to heal. And these that were really effective for me all had something in common. They all seemed to invite in a deep sense of inner resourcing and imagination, which, as I learned from my childhood, feels very real to the nervous system. So it turns out that in our imagination, we really can time travel. We can go back, and we can uncover our enoughness that we were created with. We all go through life trying to build the case that we're enough. But you don't build your enoughness, you just uncover it. In one particular journey, I got to go back to that orange ribbon scene, and I redid it. And I created a new memory of being in a class play. It was a blue velvet star, my little face sticking out of the front, my arms sticking out of the sides, just standing on the stage in front of the whole school. Now, none of that was even real. It was just an imagined feeling of being seen, accepted, and celebrated with a standing ovation, and then it suddenly was real because I felt it, and it uncovered more of my enoughness. Now, I've traded in that blue velvet star for this plush red dot. It's pretty nice. It's plush. Is this Armani? None of that matters. And maybe there's a little boy inside who's rooting for me and hoping this goes well. And that's okay. You see, we don't have to get perfect at being enough. We always were. And so here's what I really want to leave you with. You can't get good enough to feel good enough until you remember you always were.